Hello, welcome to Toby's Sideshow of Scale Styrene. Today I'm going to look at my third annual Tom Daniel tribute build model, which was a group build hosted over at Classic Plastic 101 by Chris Cortell and Dirk Pitt. And my entry, at least my first entry for the year, was the Big Red Baron. This 1/12 scale model came out in 1969. The issue I have here is from 1986. I bought it way back in 1986 and finally got around to building it. And I will let everyone else know that if you've got an old kit in your stash that you've been dying to build but for some reason haven't built, take it out and build it. You'll be glad you did. Really had a great time building this thing. What you see in the box is the kit. It comes with that little Fokker triplane. I've moved that over into one of my other 124 scale kits. I did not bother building that. The chrome dome came in a nice plastic bag, and I've kept it in there ever since. And then the body was molded in a nice red. And I ended up painting it red, so you can barely tell that I painted it. In any case, instruction sheets are straightforward, pretty clear, almost identical to what you see in the 124 scale kit. Among the differences are the way that the wheels are attached and basically a few other minor things, but for the most part this kit can be built in about an hour once you've painted it and everything, if you build it straight out of the box. I mean, very simple build. Almost the same. Well, if you've ever built the 124 scale, then you know how simple it is. Also, you see down here this little skull that comes with it, which at first I was kind of impressed with, but later, well, I wasn't as happy with it as I thought I would be. Still, it's a nice little touch to the kit, and it is one of those parts that says it's the Big Red Baron. So, without further ado, let me do my little 360 walk around of the kit. I'll do a little talking on it. If you notice, I've put the Big Red Baron decal here instead of down here, and that's mainly because it doesn't fit down here. On second thought, what I should have done is basically cut the band, cut it like so, and put red and then Baron, but even then it's too long, so I just put it up here where the kills used to be. And it just wraps around a little bit to the back. If you notice in the box art, they did not even bother to use the decal, so they know it was a problem. They probably should have made the Big Red Baron decal a little bit smaller. The wheels do move. I painted the front ones. I might end up painting the back ones. I haven't gotten around to it yet. And you see, I did a little bit of detailing on the engine. There's also a little bit of other detailing that was done. And as you swing around, you see I've also made a 1/8 scale Ghost of the Red Baron to go along with my Big Red Baron. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. And there we go to the back. I love this quick change rear end on the back of it. Just very reminiscent of the 60s. I'm sure they're still making them today, though. And there we have it. So that was the quick walk around of the completed vehicle, but let's go over how I got there. And we'll start by looking at an actual Mercedes D3 engine. Now, obviously, the Mercedes D3 engine was not used in the Fokker triplane. That used actually a Lerone rotary engine, which was a French engine, and then later they switched over to a different rotary engine. But in any case, the Mercedes D3 was used in the Albatross D3 and the Albatross D5, and that is the planes that Richtofen and the Red Baron actually scored most of his kills in. He's famous for the triplane mainly because he was killed in the triplane. And I decided to take a look at the actual engine because I wanted to do some detailing on the engine. And what you see here are the various spark plug lines and then the magneto. The engine actually has spark plug lines and magnetos on both sides, so it actually holds 12 spark plugs and 2 magnetos. It's a single overhead cam engine. the way you start this original engine is there would be the propeller shaft here, and you would basically crank the propeller 6 times around to get everything lubricated. And then there was a magneto in the cockpit that you would have to, a little pump that you'd have to pump rapidly to actually get the engine kicked over and start it. I opted that would probably not work too well in the car, and so I decided I was going to have to do something about that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so this was the basic engine. I painted it once, had to strip it, and the way I stripped it, because I was just using Tamiya's acrylic paint, is I put it in Ajax dishwashing liquid, the grapefruit stuff. And I guess because the paint was only about a week or 2 old, after sitting in that dishwashing liquid for about 2 weeks, not even 2 weeks, more like 2 hours, all of the paint just came right off with a toothbrush. So something to think about with your Tamiya acrylics. If you want to strip paint that you just put on, try considering just dishwashing liquid. It works really well. Now what you see on top here, that's actually the cooling jackets for the Pistons, and it's basically a metal cooling jacket that goes over it and water flows through it. And this is a pipe for the spark plug lines, and then the spark plug lines feed into that and out the back over to the magneto. You have one of those on each side. Your pistons are down below, and this area here should have been hollowed out, but I decided instead just to paint it black. And this is what we end up with. So the dark gray cooling jackets, that's because I opted to go with dark gray for the interior also. And I have a tendency to try and keep my color palette small. In the case of this model, I went with a dark gray, a medium gray, black, white, gold, and silver. And obviously red, because it's the Red Baron. So now we've got the cooling jackets painted and the pistons painted and the black in between to make it look like space. And obviously it still needs to be touched up, but this is where I was going with it. Next up, I needed to put in the spark plug lines, and this is actually radiator hose for a 24 scale model. I was going to just use spark plug line, but it was too small, and then the radiator line's a little bit too big, but I figured I'd rather be able to see it than not see it. So the first step was getting the short lines into the pipe, and there you have it on the other side. And you see the magneto over here. I had to drill the 6 holes out for it, and then it was a matter of running lines from the pipe to the magneto, so I had to drill a hole here and pass the lines out. And that's when you can really tell that the lines are a little bit too large, because getting those 6 lines out of there was damn near impossible. This silver line you see here, that is actually the lower radiator line. What happened on the original engine is the radiator line would run here, go underneath the body, and then swing all the way back up through the top and then up into the top wing on the biplane on the Albatross. And you see here the exhaust pipes, and notice there's a lot of flash that needed to be cleaned up. I think that's mainly because of the 1986 kit. Despite that, the chrome on it is pretty good, so I was still happy with it. And you see now the bottom of the lower radiator hose, even though it's a little blurry, which is a metal pipe. A little more cleaning up, and now you see the magneto lines on the other side. And the scoop is up there now too. And now the scoop is in place. You've got the twin carbs here and the starter engine. The starter engine is basically 2 1/35 scale Sherman bogies that have been glued together and then filled in the middle and sanded, and then attached to the front with this piece of 2 pieces of evergreen plastic that are glued side to side. And this is supposed to look like a casing for like a chain or something that is running to the front of the engine. So it's basically a chain-driven starter. You see the line coming off of the side here. And this gives you a better view of the road wheels from the Sherman. And you see the spokes, which are done in the dark Panzer gray, and then the inside portion is painted gold to kind of reflect the idea of the copper wires inside the little starter. And you see here all the wire and the plumbing. I also did some black lines around the carbs here using the Sharpie. Good view of the bottom radiator hose, or radiator line rather, and it's basically just a bent piece of evergreen plastic running all the way up into the front. I just warmed it up in really hot water and then slowly bent it and then put it in cold water to help it maintain its shape. And when it gets all the way to the top here, you see a little, the black portion here is supposed to be the rubber portion of the hose, and I made a hose clamp out of bare metal foil. And you see the top radiator hose down here done in the same way, and again with a hose clamp made out of bare metal foil. You notice these pin marks along the bottom of the pipes. Fortunately, you don't see those once the kit's all put together. And as you can tell, I put some red stripes along the bottom of the oil pan, even though once the model's all built, you probably won't be able to see them. Onto the interior. Originally it was going to be painted red-brown, and then when I did it, I really didn't like the way it was looking, especially when I decided to draw in the black lines on the pinstriping. You couldn't even tell that they're there, so I decided to go with Panzer gray. And that's also when I decided to paint the engine gray, because like I said before, I like a small palette of colors. And so the engine and the interior match up with the grays and the reds. And then I painted the middle console black. Wasn't too concerned about if I was going to have a little bit of messing up around there because it's going to be trimmed. And then this is the first time ever that I decided to draw in lines with the black Sharpie. And for a first attempt, I think it came out pretty well. Had to draw them over there probably about 3 or 4 times each time because the acrylic paint wasn't too happy with the Sharpie, but in the end it worked out pretty well. And considering you're not going to see much of the interior because of the big chrome dome, I wasn't too worried about kind of the few little mess ups here and there. But all in all, I was very happy with it, and plan on doing a lot more work with Sharpies. In front, you have 2 new pedals being made. One of them is that big foot gas pedal, which were really popular back in the 1960s. And then on the other side is more or less a Maltese cross, but I made the bottom a little longer, so it's more like a Latin cross. But the idea was this will be the brake and this will be the gas pedal. As far as I could tell, there's no clutch in this. The kit only came with 2 disgustingly molded in pedals. For a 112 skull kit, I think they could have done a little bit more detail on the interior. But this foot was basically just cut freehand out of a piece of evergreen styrene, and then I made the crosses here with or the different pieces of metal to give it depth with just strips of evergreen styrene. And then I ended up painting it black and giving the highlighted extra portions in silver, and then I filled it with the Tester's clear glue to give it a little more depth, and I'm kind of happy with it, especially considering it's something you're barely going to see once the top is on. And if you notice now, the little buttons and the tufts here have been painted gold. The only colors used in here, I don't know if I mentioned it or not, are basically gold, silver, black, white, red, and 2 shades of gray. Very minimalist in the colors. As you can see, I've painted around here with silver. Need to still do a little trimming up, and the dials are in white and black. hand painted, and they could have probably been better, but again, you're not really going to be able to see them. And now I've also painted the side pads on here with the same dark gray with the black trim. There's a lot of test fitting going on too. I decided to add an emergency brake. I didn't know why the kit didn't have one to begin with, so this is just scratched out of pieces of styrene and tubing. And then if you notice here, the original shifter has a really nasty mark on it with the chrome. It's the one piece where the chrome really did not just go well, and wasn't too happy with it. And I ended up changing it later. And this was the first positioning of the shifter, and I wasn't too crazy about that. I'm sorry for the emergency brake, and I wasn't too crazy about it. So I ended up changing it, and now you see the new positioning of it. And more importantly, what you see here is light bleeding through on the sides here from this dark gray panels here. This is really a shame considering the body has 3 coats of gloss red paint and light shining through, whereas it was still able to make these shadows. And I wasn't sure if when I put the big chrome dome on top, if that would still happen. So what I decided to do is go ahead and paint the interior also a shade of gray. And so I went with medium gray. And here we see the first of about 4 coats of medium gray going on. All the interior is hand painted. The only thing that was spray painted was the body itself. And after about 3 or 4 coats of gray, the side panels now are no longer shining through, which was very fortunate for me. See how it was done. I did not bother to paint everything, just where the seat was not sitting. And now we move on to the new shifter and another view of all the painting on the inside. That skull you see on top there is one of the skulls from the is actually the driver from Rommel's rod, and the chrome on here is basically just bare metal foil, and then I used a piece of styrene tubing for the shifter and just jammed it up in there. And this is also covered with bare metal foil, and unfortunately it's got probably just as much wrinkle as the first shifter did. If I were to do it again, I would probably go ahead and invest in a Molotov pen and paint it chrome. This is just in place for this hasn't been glued down yet, as you can tell here. Another view of the face. That's the way it actually was painted when I put it on the Rommel's rod, and I never got around to repainting it. I just basically said screw it. At some point you just get tired. See here the machine guns, and now they have ammunition at it. This was done on both machine guns on both sides. The reason it's not dropping all the way down is because I'm going to build something around there, basically chutes on both sides, so that the ammunition is being fed down in through the chutes and then under the seats. So somewhere down here you have the remaining 250 odd rounds for each belt. You also see the way the steering wheel has been painted and a little bit of the dash detail here. I've added a radio on this side, which required drilling holes for the dials, and then a new strip here of bare metal foil over plastic for the very front display. And then this I just covered in bare metal foil. Again, I was getting tired and decided I've done enough and no one's going to see it. Another view of the interior, and you notice now repainted gray, the black lines around it, dials in place, gas pedal, and the shifter with that little skull on top. Here you see that I've added a new charging handle for the machine guns, and this is basically stretch sprue and such. And then this is the cloth belt hanging off the outside of the machine guns. both sides. And a view from the driver's seat, and what I noticed when I put the dash in place, light was bleeding through, so I had to build up the firewall here. So I cut a piece of styrene, painted it the dark gray, and just glued it in place here. When I started test fitting the chrome dome, had the same problem. The helmet had just a little bit of bleed here, and even with some sanding and stuff, there's still a little bit of light bleeding through here. And not wanting to try and do puttying or anything on the outside to get that helmet to fit right, I decided to just put a piece of styrene back here, paint it gray on the one side, glue it in place, and that would block light from showing through. And so here we have the end result with that. Onto the wheels. The first thing I noticed is that the back wheels had the rear disc brakes, but the front wheels had no brakes at all, so I knew I was going to have to scratch build some front brakes, and I ended up doing that later. And I patterned those off of the rear discs, which are here, and I placed those in spot, and then I ran lines for it. And this is basically, again, just evergreen tubing, and then I would end up painting it black. Got it on both sides. And then I also decided it needed to have an emergency brake, and so I made emergency brake lines here going in to the back here. Next, I colored in the black area around the springs, so you'd have more definition there. And then I painted red on the back of the quick change rear end, and then we have a view of the entire bottom here. And what you have is the lines for the emergency brakes, the fuel line coming up here into a fuel pump, and two lines coming off going into to feed the two carburetors. And here you see the line for the starter running into the bottom of the body here, the radiator line being pulled all the way around, and then I just covered the transmission pan with bare metal foil and painted the transmission dark gray, and you see this pan also painted. The wheels, I ended up painting them with the clear red to make the crosses. I'm not too happy with that. It ended up taking like 3 coats to do it, and they've got little bubbles in it and stuff, so chances are very good that I'll end up just painting those gloss red or gloss black later. But for right now, they're just staying with the red. You can see the bubbles a little bit better here. And this was scratch making the front disc brakes, and this was some piece out of the parts box of some backing of a wheel that I ended up having to drill out, and I did that with a number 11 X-Acto. And then this is just pieces of styrene that have been cut and shaped to look like disc brakes. Little red paint, little silver paint, a ring here for to hold it in place a little bit better, some lines at it, and fit it into place. And the front wheels can still turn despite the disc brakes being in place. And here we are looking at the rear tail lights, brake light, backup light, and then the turning signal. And this is just bare metal foil crammed into the spot. I was planning on either covering it with a piece of clear plastic, which was just being a fundamental pain in the butt when I was trying to glue it in place, so I gave up. Then I thought about trying to fill it in with Tester's clear glue. That did not work very well either, so I finally decided I'm just going to trim it to fit so that it looks like they're well recessed, they're Frenched into the back. And did that on both sides. I'm not 100% happy about it, but until I can find a better way, that's what it's going to be. I wish that Monogram way back when would have decided to actually make some tail lights for this instead of molding them in. At 1/12 scale, they could have done a little bit more detail. I think they rushed getting this thing out. Here we see the final tubing up into the two little tubes that feed into the carburetor. This is the way the lines were on the D3, so I just went ahead and did the same thing with these little tubes here. And they're in silver, and then you have the black line for the starter running back. And this was a pain in the ass to drag link, so I had to hold it down here. The engine is now in place. We're ready to get the radiator in spot, and radiator is going on now. Radiator painted in according to the way it is on the box art, so you've got the black here, the nice big chrome cross, and then these black lines here, which are supposed to be slits for the light to show through, and this chrome part is actually supposed to be a cover. I really don't know why they did this, because that kind of thing was used, I think, mostly in World War II, not World War I. I wish they'd have done something else with the lights, but I just went ahead, and at this point I'm getting tired, so I just built it as it was. And we've got the nice sight up front there. You can't tell real well here, but the machine gun barrels have been hollowed out using an X-Acto knife. Knowing that the decals were going to silver, I decided I needed to really do a job and cut these as close as possible so that when I put them on the big chrome helmet, there would not be a lot of silvering. And I did that with both decals, and then I put them on, and it worked out pretty well. The only problem is these decals started to curl a whole lot because of the way they had been trimmed and everything, which meant I had to play with them quite a bit and use a lot of microset to get them in spot, which worked out okay though, because they're pretty thick decals, so they held up to a lot of twisting and turning. Got them both on, helmet in place, big Red Baron is finally done, and on to my little fellow here, which is the Ghost of the Red Baron in 1/8 scale. He's actually made from two skulls. The top of the skull is from the Prisoner of Castlemare, the skull that's sitting on the ground, and then the lower jawbone was cut loose from some other skull that I didn't care too much for. And then the helmet is a 1/9 scale helmet out of the Kettengrad kit by Essie in 1/9 scale. And then the cross, this is supposed to be a piston, and then the cross down here is just cut out of evergreen plastic. The spike on top here, that is off of a 1/24 scale Red Baron. That's what happens when you've got about 4 Red Baron kits sitting around. The decal on the side here, I just made myself, and it's a nice little skull with the pistons on it. And as you can tell from the chrome, it is basically, once again, bare metal foil, and there's a lot of pieces because of the shape of the helmet. If I had to do it again, I would definitely use a Molotov chrome pen, and I will probably go back and do that later. And you notice this long piston tube here. That is something different. It's basically a golf tee. The bottom here is painted gloss black, trimmed around, and then painted silver. There's my golf tees. Bought a bag of 100 so I could use one. I don't golf, but I thought it'd be the perfect piston for the Ghost of the Red Baron, so it was worth the $3. And here you see the bottom of it with the what kind of styrene I use from Evergreen. It's one of those that has all the grids, which made it real easy to measure and cut it out. Comparisons of size. This is the 1/43 scale die cast. Up front you see a Hot Wheels, And on the side you see the 1/24 scale Red Baron, and as you can tell, it fits within the wheelbase of the big Red Baron. And here's its last home, sitting next to my Vampirella in the background. And that's my whole look at my big Red Baron. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it was kind of long, but it's a big kit, and there was quite a few things that I ended up doing with it to get it done. From start to finish, it took me about 3 months, probably a good total of about 8 hours of actual building time, though. Again, thanks for visiting. Sorry this was such a long video, but I do hope you enjoy it. Comments are always welcome. Insults are always cheerfully ignored. Thanks again for coming. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe and invite your friends. Thank you.